The desert wind howled like a wounded coyote across the barren landscape of Arizona Territory. 1882. Red dust swirled between the scattered sagebrush and Joshua trees, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that spoke of months without rain. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the distant mountains into shimmering mirages that danced and wavered in the heat. Sarah McKenna pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching the dust devils spin across the valley below. At 26, she was already a widow. Her husband Tom buried these past 2 years beneath a simple wooden cross on the hill behind their homestead. A mining accident, they'd said. A cave-in that took 3 good men and left their families to scratch out whatever living they could from this unforgiving land. "Mama, I'm hungry," came a small voice from inside the cabin. Sarah turned to see her daughter Emma, just turned 5, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The child's dress was patched in 3 places, but clean. Sarah made sure of that, no matter how scarce the water. "I know, sweet pea. Mama's going to make some cornbread soon as I fetch water from the creek." The creek was nearly dry this time of year, reduced to a trickle that barely wet the rocks. But it was all they had, and Sarah was grateful for even that small mercy. She grabbed the wooden bucket from beside the door, checking first for scorpions, a habit that had saved her more than once. Their cabin sat isolated, a full day's ride from the nearest settlement of Willow Springs. Tom had chosen this spot for the copper deposits he'd been certain lay beneath the rocky soil, but all his certainty had gotten him was an early grave. Now Sarah survived on what little she could grow in her garden patch, the eggs from her 3 scrawny chickens, and the occasional rabbit she managed to snare. As she made her way down the narrow path to the creek, Sarah's mind wandered to the stories she'd heard in town last month when she'd traded her preserved vegetables for flour and salt. Apache raids had increased along the territorial border. The cavalry was stretched thin, trying to protect the scattered homesteads and mining camps. Just last week, the Hendricks family had abandoned their claim and headed back east after finding their cattle slaughtered. Sarah shuddered, quickening her pace. She kept Tom's old Henry rifle loaded and ready by the door, though she prayed she'd never have to use it for more than hunting. The Apache were like ghosts. People said you never saw them until it was too late. The creek bed was even drier than she'd feared. Sarah had to dig a small depression in the sandy bottom to collect enough water to half-fill her bucket. As she waited for the sediment to settle, she heard the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The loneliness of this place pressed down on her like a physical weight. Sometimes she wondered if she should take Emma and leave, head back to Missouri where her sister lived, but this land was all Tom had left them, and stubborn pride kept her from admitting defeat. That night, after a meager supper of cornbread and bean soup, Sarah tucked Emma into their bed, the only real bed in the 2-room cabin. She herself would sleep on the corn husk mattress by the stove, as she did every night, keeping watch. "Tell me about Papa," Emma requested, as she often did. Sarah smoothed the child's dark hair. "Your Papa was a dreamer, little one. He saw gold and copper where others saw only rocks. He built this cabin with his own hands, cutting each log, fitting them together like a puzzle. Was he strong? The strongest man I ever knew, but sometimes—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes strength isn't enough. Sometimes this land asks for more than a body can give." After Emma drifted off, Sarah sat by the window, mending by the light of their single oil lamp. The October night had brought a chill that crept through the gaps between the logs. Winter would come soon, and she worried about their dwindling food stores. The root cellar was barely half full, and the hunting had been poor. Around midnight, the wind picked up suddenly, rattling the shutters. Sarah set aside her sewing and peered out into the darkness. Clouds had rolled in, obscuring the stars. The air smelled different, charged, like before a storm. Within minutes, the wind became a howling monster. Sand and grit pelted the cabin walls. Sarah quickly shuttered the windows and checked that the door was barred. A sandstorm could last hours or days, and the worst ones could bury a cabin to its roof. She had just returned to her chair when she heard something that made her blood run cold. A sound that wasn't wind or sand. It was a groan, human and full of pain, coming from somewhere near the creek bed. Sarah's first instinct was to ignore it. Nothing good came from venturing out in a sandstorm, and it could be a trick. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and despite every rational thought screaming against it. She found herself reaching for Tom's rifle and her heavy cloak. She paused at Emma's bedside. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the storm's fury. Sarah kissed her forehead and moved to the door. If something happened to her, Emma would be alone. But if someone was dying out there? The wind nearly tore the door from her hands as she opened it. Sand stung her face like 1,000 needles. She pulled her cloak over her head and fought her way toward the creek, guided more by memory than sight. There, collapsed beside the largest cottonwood, was a figure. Sarah approached cautiously, rifle ready. The man, for it was a man, lay face down, unmoving. Dark stains on the ground beneath him could only be blood. She knelt beside him, still wary, and turned him over. Her breath caught, even in the dim stormlight. She could see the distinctive clothing, deerskin leggings, a torn cloth shirt, and, most telling of all, the beaded band around his forehead, an Apache warrior. Fear coursed through her. This was the enemy, the savage her people spoke of in hushed, terrified whispers. She should leave him, let the desert claim him. It would be justice, some would say, for all the raids and deaths. But as she looked at his face, she saw not a savage, but a young man, perhaps 30 years old, with strong features twisted in pain. Blood seeped from a bullet wound in his side and another in his shoulder. His breathing was shallow, labored. In that moment, Sarah remembered Tom's words from years ago, when they'd first talked of coming west. A person's humanity isn't measured by their tribe or their skin, but by what they do when no one's watching, making a decision that would change everything. Sarah slung the rifle over her shoulder and grabbed the wounded man under his arms. He was heavy, solid with muscle, and it took all her strength to drag him inch by inch back toward the cabin. The storm raged around them, trying to rip them apart, but Sarah held on with grim determination. By the time she got him inside, her strength was nearly spent. She managed to drag him to the corner farthest from Emma's bed, then collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. The Apache remained unconscious, which was probably a mercy. Sarah knew she had just invited death into her home, but she couldn't have left him to die alone in the storm. As she prepared to tend his wounds, Sarah whispered a prayer, not just for his life, but for forgiveness for what she was about to do. Outside, the sandstorm continued its assault on the cabin, as if the very desert itself was angry at her choice. Sarah's hands trembled as she lit a second oil lamp and gathered what medical supplies she had, torn sheets for bandages, a bottle of whiskey Tom had kept hidden, and her sewing needle sterilized in flame. The wounded Apache lay unconscious on the floor, his breathing shallow and irregular. Blood had soaked through his clothing, pooling beneath him on the worn wooden boards. Working quickly, she cut away his torn shirt with her scissors, revealing the extent of his injuries. The shoulder wound was a clean through and through, likely from a cavalry rifle, but the side wound worried her more. The bullet was still lodged somewhere inside, and she could see the telltale signs of infection beginning to set in. As she cleaned the wounds with a whiskey-soaked cloth, Sarah found herself studying his face. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, and scars that spoke of a hard life. Around his neck hung a small leather pouch decorated with beadwork. She left it untouched, sensing its importance. "Mama?" Emma's sleepy voice made Sarah's heart stop. The child stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Back to bed, sweet pea," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm while positioning herself between Emma and the wounded man. "Who's that?" Emma asked, peering around her mother with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Just someone who needs help. Like when we doctored that hurt rabbit, remember? Now go back to sleep." Emma reluctantly returned to bed. And Sarah pulled the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the main room. She'd have to think of a better explanation come morning. But for now, she had work to do. The shoulder wound was easier to tend. She cleaned it thoroughly, packed it with clean cloth, and bound it tight. The side wound required more courage. Sarah had watched Tom dig out buckshot from his leg once, after a hunting accident. She tried to remember his steady hands, his calm instructions. The Apache groaned when she probed the wound with her needle, but didn't wake. Sarah bit her lip, tasting blood, as she searched for the bullet. There! She felt the scrape of metal against metal. Using her needle like a tiny hook, she managed to work the bullet free. Fresh blood flowed, and she quickly pressed clean cloth against it, holding firm until the bleeding slowed. By the time she finished bandaging both wounds, dawn light was creeping through the cracks in the shutters. The sandstorm had passed, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Sarah's back ached from bending over her patient, and her dress was stained with blood. She dragged Tom's old buffalo hide from storage and covered the Apache, then set about cleaning up the evidence of her night's work. The bloody rags went into the stove to burn. The floor needed scrubbing. All the while, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd done. Harboring an Apache could get her arrested or worse. The territorial government had strict laws about aiding hostiles, but as she looked at the unconscious man, she saw only another human being fighting for life. Enemy or not, she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. For 3 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness. Sarah kept him hidden in the small storage room she'd cleared out, moving him when he was lucid enough to help. She told Emma he was a traveler who'd gotten lost in the storm, though she could see the questions in her daughter's eyes. The fever came on the second night. Sarah spent hours cooling his burning skin with wet cloths, forcing water between his cracked lips. He thrashed and muttered in his delirium, speaking words in a language she didn't understand. Once, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes wide but unseeing. She sang softly, the same lullabies she used for Emma, until he calmed. On the 4th morning, she entered the storage room to find him fully awake, dark eyes tracking her movement with the wariness of a trapped wolf. Sarah set down the bowl of broth she'd prepared and stepped back, giving him space. Water, he said, the word rough but clear. She brought him a cup, watching as he struggled to sit up. Pride kept him from asking for help. She could see, but his wounds made movement agony. Finally, she stepped forward and steadied him, ignoring his tension at her touch. You're safe here, she said quietly. Drink slowly. He studied her face as he drank, suspicion clear in every line of his body. When he finished, he set the cup aside with careful deliberation. Why? The single word carried the weight of all the history between their peoples. Sarah considered her answer. Because leaving you to die would have made me someone I don't want to be. He was silent for a long moment. Your people will kill you for this. Maybe, but that's tomorrow's worry. Today, you need to heal. She reached for the bowl of broth, but he shook his head. I must go. You can barely sit up. That wound in your side will tear open if you try to ride. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away out of stubborn pride. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. He accepted the broth without further protest. Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed. Sarah would tend his wounds, bring food and water, and they would exchange a few careful words. She learned his name, Naichi, which he told her meant mischievous one in his language. He was indeed a warrior, separated from his band during a skirmish with cavalry troops. Emma, with the adaptability of childhood, accepted his presence more easily than Sarah had expected. She would peek around the doorframe, fascinated by this stranger who was so different from anyone she'd known. One afternoon, Sarah found her showing Naichi her collection of pretty rocks, chattering away while he listened with grave attention. She has no fear, he observed after Emma had gone. Children see the world more clearly than adults sometimes. Sarah replied, checking his bandages. The wounds were healing well, though slowly. "You are not afraid?" Sarah paused in her work. "I'm terrified every moment, but fear and doing what's right aren't mutually exclusive." He caught her hand as she reached for the fresh bandages. "Your husband, he is gone?" He'd noticed Tom's things, the masculine touches in a house run by a woman alone. 2 years now, mining accident. She gently pulled her hand free, unsettled by the warmth of his touch. "This is why you understand," he said quietly. "Loss makes us see past the things that divide us." That evening, as Sarah prepared their simple meal, she heard horses approaching. Her blood ran cold. Visitors were rare out here, and rarely brought good news. She quickly ushered Emma into the storage room with Naichi. "Stay quiet, both of you," she whispered, then closed the door and went to greet her visitors with Tom's rifle in hand. 3 men sat their horses in her yard, neighbors from the valley, their faces grim beneath their wide-brimmed hats. "Mrs. McKenna," said John Patterson, touching his hat. "Sorry to trouble you, but we're riding through to warn folks. Apache war party attacked the stage station at Devil's Creek, killed 2 men, made off with horses and supplies. You seen anything unusual?" Sarah's mouth went dry, but she kept her voice steady. "Nothing but that sandstorm few nights back." "Been keeping close to home with Emma." Patterson's eyes swept the cabin and surrounding area. "Might be best if you came into town for a spell. Not safe for a woman alone out here." "I appreciate the concern, but this is my home. Tom built it strong, and I've got his rifle." The men exchanged glances. "Your choice, ma'am, but keep that rifle handy. These Apache, they're getting bolder. Found blood trails heading this direction after the skirmish. Wounded one got away." After they left, Sarah leaned against the door, heart pounding. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the blood trails to her cabin. She had to get Naichi away before that happened, but he was still too weak to travel far. That night, she sat by his pallet in the storage room while Emma slept. "They're looking for you. You heard?" He nodded. "I bring danger to your house. This was not my intent." "I know." Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. "But you can't leave yet. Those wounds need at least another week. A week may be too long. Your people do not forgive those who help their enemies. Then we'll face that when it comes." She met his gaze in the lamplight. "I made my choice when I dragged you in from that storm. I'll see it through." For the first time since she'd found him, Naichi smiled, a small, rueful curve of his lips. "You have the heart of a warrior, Sarah McKenna." She found herself smiling back, despite everything. Just a stubborn widow who doesn't know when to mind her own business. But as she lay on her pallet that night, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, Sarah knew their time was running out. Soon, she would have to choose between her safety and her conscience once again. And this time, the choice might cost her everything. The days following the visit from Patterson and his men passed intense vigilance. Sarah found herself jumping at every sound, the creak of wood settling, the scratch of tumbleweeds against the cabin walls, the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. She kept Tom's rifle within reach at all times, even when drawing water from the creek. Word spread quickly through the valley about the Apache raids. Twice more, riders stopped by the cabin to check on her, and each time Sarah's heart hammered as she assured them all was well. She'd taken to burning sage and cooking strong-smelling stews to mask any scent that might give away Naichi's presence. The 3rd week brought an unexpected trial. Sarah woke to find her food stores dangerously low. The root cellar was nearly empty, and her last sack of flour had been invaded by mice. She'd need to make the day's journey to Willow Springs for supplies, but leaving Emma alone with Naichi seemed impossible. Taking them both would be even more dangerous. "I could watch her," Naichi offered when she explained the dilemma. He was sitting up now, his color better though movement still pained him. "The child knows me. She will be safe." Sarah shook her head. "If anyone comes by—" "Then I hide, as I have done. You cannot let her starve for fear of what might happen." The logic was sound, but trusting her daughter's life to an Apache warrior went against every instinct drilled into her by frontier life. Yet, as she looked at him, she saw not an enemy, but a man who'd shown patience with Emma's chatter, who'd carved her a small wooden horse from a piece of kindling to keep her entertained. "If anything happens to her," Sarah began, "I would protect her with my life," Nietzsche said simply. "This I swear on the spirits of my ancestors." Something in his eyes, a fierce sincerity, made her believe him, against all reason. Sarah prepared for the journey, leaving detailed instructions and enough food for the day. Emma seemed delighted by the arrangement, already pestering Nietzsche to tell her more stories about eagles and coyotes. The ride to town was torture. Every mile that separated her from Emma felt like a betrayal of her maternal duty. But they needed supplies desperately, and waiting longer would only raise more suspicions. Willow Springs bustled with activity. The recent raids had driven many outlying families into town, and the streets were crowded with wagons and worried faces. Sarah traded her preserved goods quickly, anxious to return home, but was stopped by Mrs. Henderson at the general store. "Sarah McKenna, Lord have mercy! What are you doing out here alone? Haven't you heard about the savages?" "I've heard," Sarah said, trying to edge past the older woman. "But I can't abandon my homestead. Pride goes before a fall. Young lady." "Why? Just yesterday they found the Garrett family's wagon burned to cinders. No sign of them at all." "Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. "Some say there's Apache hiding out in the valley, waiting to strike again. Marshals organizing search parties." Sarah's blood chilled. "Search parties? Going homestead to homestead, making sure folks are safe. They'll probably reach your place in a day or two." The ride home was a blur of panic. Sarah pushed her old mare harder than she should have, terrified of what she might find. But as the cabin came into view, intact and peaceful, she nearly wept with relief. Inside, she found Emma and Nietzsche exactly where she'd left them, the child showing him how to play cat's cradle with a piece of yarn. "We must talk," she told Nietzsche after Emma was asleep. She explained about the search parties, watching his face grow grave. "Then I leave tonight," he said. "You're not strong enough. The wound could reopen. Better to die free than bring destruction to this house." He struggled to his feet, hand pressed to his side. "You have shown more kindness than I had right to expect. I will not repay it with danger." But as he took a step, his knees buckled. Sarah caught him, feeling the fever that had returned to his skin. The ride would kill him, and they both knew it. "There's another way," she said slowly, an idea forming. "The old mine shaft, where my husband died, it's boarded up, but the first chamber is stable. You could hide there until they pass." Nietzsche shook his head. "If they track me there, they will know you helped. The punishment. Let me worry about that." Sarah was already gathering supplies. Blankets, water, food. "It's a mile up the hillside, hidden by rocks. They won't search there if I tell them it's dangerous." Moving him in the darkness was a nightmare. Nietzsche could barely walk, leaning heavily on Sarah as they made their slow way up the rocky path. The mine entrance loomed before them, a black mouth in the hillside that still made Sarah shudder. Tom had died somewhere in those depths, crushed beneath tons of rock. She pried loose the boards covering the entrance and helped Nietzsche inside. The first chamber was as she remembered, roughly carved, but stable, with timber supports Tom had installed. She spread blankets in the driest corner and helped him settle. "I'll come when I can," she promised. "Stay quiet. No fires. If something happens and I don't return, I will find my way home." He caught her hand as she turned to go. "Sarah McKenna, I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. You owe me nothing. Just stay alive." The search party arrived 2 days later, 6 men led by Marshal Coleman, a lean, hard-eyed man who'd lost his brother to an Apache raid years before. They searched every corner of the cabin, the root cellar, the chicken coop, while Sarah stood by with Emma clutched to her side. "You've been alone out here since the raids?" Coleman asked, his pale eyes studying her face. "Just me and Emma, like always. No travelers, no one seeking help, no one." The lie came smoothly, but Sarah felt it burning in her throat. Coleman walked the perimeter of her property, studying the ground. At one point he knelt, examining something in the dust, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. But he rose without comment and returned to his horse. "There's been sign of Apache in this valley. Mrs. McKenna, you'd be wise to reconsider coming to town. I'll take it under advisement. Marshal." After they left, Sarah waited until nightfall before making her way to the mine. She found Naichi fevered again, the wound seeping through its bandages. The damp cold of the mine was making things worse. "The search is over," she told him. "You can come back." But even as she helped him return to the cabin, Sarah knew their situation was becoming impossible. Naichi needed better care than she could provide, but taking him to a doctor was out of the question, and every day he remained increased the chance of discovery. The breaking point came a week later. Sarah had taken Emma to gather the last of the wild onions from the meadow when they returned to find a horse tethered outside the cabin. Not just any horse, but a painted pony with Apache trappings. Inside, a young Apache woman stood facing Naichi, speaking rapidly in their language. She turned at Sarah's entrance, hand moving to the knife at her belt. But Naichi spoke sharply, and she stilled. "This is Ayana," he said. "My sister. She has been searching for me." The woman was beautiful in the fierce way of her people, with dark eyes that assessed Sarah with deep suspicion. She spoke again to Naichi, gesturing at his bandages, at the cabin, at Sarah herself. "She says I shame our people by accepting help from whites." Naichi translated, his voice neutral, "that I should return with her now. You're not healed enough to travel." Sarah protested. Ayana understood enough English to snort at this. She pointed at Naichi and spoke again, her tone urgent. "The soldiers search for our band. We must move to winter grounds. She says—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "She says you will betray us when it suits you. That all whites do." Sarah felt anger flash through her. "I've risked everything to help your brother. My daughter and I could be driven from our home or worse if anyone knew." Ayana's eyes narrowed as Naichi translated. She studied Sarah for a long moment. Then Emma, who was peeking out from behind her mother's skirts. Something in the woman's expression softened slightly when she looked at the child. The discussion that followed was heated, though Sarah could only understand Naichi's half. Finally, Ayana seemed to reach a decision. She spoke directly to Sarah for the first time. "You saved my brother. For this, I give you warning. Men come, many men with guns. They know Apache here. You must go." Sarah's stomach dropped. "When?" "Tomorrow, maybe day after." Ayana moved to support her brother. "We leave now." "He's not ready," Sarah insisted. But she could see the resignation in Naichi's eyes. His people needed him, and staying would only bring disaster to everyone. As they prepared to leave, Naichi pressed something into Sarah's hand, the beaded leather pouch from around his neck. "For protection," he said quietly. "And so you remember that not all peoples are enemies." Sarah watched them disappear into the darkness, Ayana supporting her brother's weight, moving with the silence their people were known for. The cabin felt empty without his presence, though he'd only been there a few weeks. That night, as she held Emma close, Sarah made her decision. Come dawn, they would pack what they could carry and head for town. The cabin Tom had built with such hope would stand empty, but they would be alive. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah touched the leather pouch at her throat and wondered if she would ever see Naichi again, or if their strange friendship would remain just a dangerous memory of a time when enemy lines blurred in the face of simple human compassion. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the weight of leaving everything behind. Sarah moved through the cabin like a ghost, packing only essentials: clothes, food, Tom's Bible, and the small daguerreotype of their wedding day. Each item left behind felt like abandoning a piece of her husband's memory. Emma didn't understand. "Why are we leaving? Mama, what about the chickens? What about Papa's tools?" "We're going on a trip to town for a while," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The chickens will be fine. They know how to find food." She was tying the last bundle to their old mare when she heard horses. Too many horses. Coming too fast. Her heart sank. They'd waited too long. 8 riders thundered into the yard, dust billowing around them. Sarah recognized Marshal Coleman at the lead, his face grim beneath his hat, but it was the man beside him who made her blood run cold. Samuel Morrison, the Indian agent, known throughout the territory for his ruthless pursuit of Apache. Going somewhere, Mrs. McKenna. Coleman dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. Just heading to town. Marshal, after what happened, I thought it best. Morrison's eyes sharpened. Ayanna, you know this name? Sarah realized her mistake too late. I heard it in town. People talking. Interesting. Morrison walked slowly around her, like a wolf circling prey. Because Ayanna is the sister of a wounded Apache we've been tracking. His blood trail led to this valley before we lost it. I don't know anything about that. Morrison smiled coldly. No? Then you won't mind if we search your property. Thoroughly this time. The men dismounted and spread out. Sarah stood frozen. Emma pressed against her side. As they tore through the cabin, they overturned furniture, scattered her carefully preserved goods, ripped open the tick mattresses. One man emerged from the root cellar carrying blood-stained rags Sarah had missed burning. Well, Morrison said softly. These look fresh. From butchering. Sarah said desperately. I had to slaughter a chicken last week. Chicken blood looks different from human blood. Mrs. McKenna. Morrison nodded to his men. Check the outbuildings. Check everything. It was Coleman who found the final evidence. Apache beadwork that had fallen behind the storage room cot. And worse, the clear marks where a pallet had been laid out. Sarah McKenna, Morrison announced. You're under arrest for harboring a hostile Indian and providing aid to enemies of the territory. No! Emma began to cry as rough hands seized Sarah's arms. Leave my mama alone! The child comes too, Morrison said. She's been exposed to their influence. She's 5 years old. Sarah struggled against the men holding her. She's innocent. No white child is safe around Apache sympathizers. Morrison's voice was ice. She'll be placed with a proper family who can undo the damage you've done. The ride to town was a nightmare. Sarah's hands were bound. Emma sobbing in the saddle in front of one of Morrison's men. The familiar landscape passed in a blur of dust and despair. She'd saved a life, and now she would lose everything for it. In Willow Springs, word spread quickly. People emerged from shops and houses to stare as the group rode down Main Street. Sarah heard the whispers, saw the mix of shock and disgust on familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson stood outside the general store, shaking her head in righteous condemnation. They locked Sarah in the town jail, a small building with 2 cells that usually held only drunks and petty thieves. Emma was torn from her arms despite her desperate pleas. Please, she begged Coleman, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Let me say goodbye properly. Let me explain. Nothing to explain, Morrison interrupted. The child goes to the Thornton family. They've agreed to take her in, teach her proper Christian values. Sarah knew the Thorntons' strict, joyless people who believed in discipline over affection. The thought of Emma in their care was almost worse than her own fate. That night, alone in her cell, Sarah clutched Nietzsche's beaded pouch and wept. She'd known the risks, but somehow hadn't believed it would come to this. The rightness of saving a life had seemed so clear in the moment. Now, in the cold reality of consequences, she wondered if she'd been a fool. Morning brought visitors. First came Reverend Palmer, urging her to repent and reveal where the Apache had gone, then Mrs. Morrison, the agent's wife, offering false sympathy while fishing for details. Sarah told them nothing, earning their scorn but maintaining what little honor she had left. On the second day, unexpected help arrived. Martha Brennan, the doctor's wife and one of the few women who'd shown Sarah kindness after Tom's death, slipped into the jail during the marshal's lunch break. This is madness, Martha whispered, pressing a bundle through the bars, clean clothes and food. Arresting a woman for showing Christian charity. They don't see it that way. Sarah touched the other woman's hand gratefully. "How is Emma?" Martha's face darkened. "Miserable. She cries for you constantly. The Thorntons have her scrubbing floors, say it builds character." Sarah's heart clenched. "There must be something." "My husband is speaking to the circuit judge when he arrives next week. Perhaps if you showed remorse, claimed you were coerced." "I wasn't coerced. I made my choice freely." Martha sighed. "Then God help you. Sarah, they're talking about prison. Maybe worse. Morrison is pushing for an example to be made." The week crawled by. Sarah existed in a haze of worry for Emma and dreams haunted by Naichi's fevered face. She wondered if he'd survived the journey. If his wound had held, at least he was free. That had to count for something. The day before the judge arrived, chaos erupted. Sarah woke to shouting and gunfire. Through her small window, she could see riders in the street, Apache warriors, moving fast and fierce through the town. Buildings were burning. Women screamed. The jail door burst open. Sarah shrank back, expecting death, but the figure who entered was familiar. Ayanna, fierce and beautiful in war paint, stood before her cell. "You saved my brother," she said in her broken English. "Now we save you." She shot the lock off Sarah's cell and gestured urgently. "Come, quick, Emma." Sarah gasped. "My daughter." "Already taken. Come now or die here." Sarah had no choice but to follow. Outside was controlled chaos. Apache warriors held the main street while others loaded supplies from the general store. Sarah saw bodies but looked away, focusing on following Ayanna to where horses waited. There, mounted on a painted pony with Emma clutched in front of him, was Naichi. He looked stronger, though still careful of his side. Emma's tear-stained face lit up when she saw her mother. "Mama!" Sarah scrambled onto the horse Ayanna indicated, her heart pounding. This was madness. She was fleeing with the very people she'd been arrested for helping. There would be no going back after this. "Why?" she asked Naichi as they prepared to ride. His dark eyes were grave. "Ayanna told me of your capture. Honor demanded we act. Among my people, a life saved must be repaid. This is more than repayment. This is justice." He interrupted. "Your people would punish you for showing mercy." "That is not justice." Morrison appeared at the end of the street, rifle raised, shouting orders to his scattered men. Naichi wheeled his horse, placing himself between Morrison and Sarah. "Go!" he commanded. They rode hard into the desert, the burning town falling behind them. Emma clung to Sarah, her small body shaking with tears and fear. Sarah's own mind reeled with the enormity of what had happened. She was now truly outside the law, a white woman fleeing with Apache raiders. Everything she'd known, every connection to her old life, was severed as they climbed into the rocky hills. Sarah looked back one last time at the smoke rising from Willow Springs. She thought of Tom's grave on their homestead, of the cabin he'd built, of the life they'd planned. All gone now, scattered like ash on the desert wind. Ahead lay only uncertainty, traveling with people who had every reason to hate her kind. Yet Naichi had risked his life and the lives of his people to save her. Perhaps, in this harsh land where survival meant everything, the bonds forged by mercy were stronger than the divisions of race and culture. "Where are we going?" she asked Ayanna when they finally stopped to rest the horses. The Apache woman studied her with those dark, knowing eyes. "To winter camp. You are one of us now. No choice." Sarah held Emma tighter, feeling the weight of those words. No choice. Just as there had been no real choice that night in the sandstorm when she'd found Naichi bleeding in the darkness. Some moments demanded action regardless of consequences. And those moments, for better or worse, shaped the course of lives. As they resumed their journey into the unknown territory ahead, Sarah touched the beaded pouch at her throat and prayed she would find the strength for whatever came next. The Apache winter camp lay hidden in a canyon deep in the mountains, where ancient cottonwoods grew along a stream that ran even in the dry season. Sarah had never imagined such a place existed. Wickiups arranged in family groups, smoke rising from cook fires, children playing between the dwellings despite the cold that bit through her thin dress. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Warriors emerged from lodges. Women stopped their work to stare. Children scattered like startled quail. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes as Naichi led their group to the center of camp. An elderly man emerged from the largest wickiup, his weathered face marked by years of sun and struggle. He wore a blanket decorated with intricate patterns and carried himself with unmistakable authority. This was Naichi's grandfather, the chief Dakea. He spoke at length with Naichi and Ayana in their language, his eyes frequently turning to Sarah and Emma. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tones: surprise, disapproval, resignation. Finally, Dakea addressed her in accented but clear English. "You saved my grandson when your people would have let him die. This debt we acknowledge, but bringing you here brings danger to us all. The soldiers will search harder for a white woman and child." "I didn't ask to come here," Sarah said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "But I'm grateful for your protection." The old chief studied her for a long moment. "Gratitude is not enough. You must earn your place among us, and there is only one way." He gestured to Naichi. "You will join with my grandson. As his wife, you become Apache. The soldiers cannot take what belongs to us." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What?" "No." Naichi stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache. Dakea's response was sharp. "Final." Ayana translated, her voice neutral. "Grandfather says this is the only way. Without the protection of marriage, the people will not accept you. With it, you are family, protected by our law." "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "I can't." "We barely know each other." "You know enough," Dakea said. "You trusted him with your daughter's life. He trusted you with his in this land. That is more than many marriages begin with." Sarah looked at Emma, who was watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. What choice did she have? Return to the settlements meant prison or worse. Stay unmarried among the Apache meant being forever an outsider, vulnerable. "And if I refuse?" Dakea's expression didn't change. "Then you leave, now. We will not turn you to the wolves, but neither will we shelter you." The ceremony took place that evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls red as blood. Sarah wore a doe-skin dress borrowed from one of the women, her hair braided in the Apache style. Emma stood beside her, confused but trusting. Naichi looked as trapped as she felt, going through the motions with a stoic expression. There were no flowers, no white dress, no church bells. Instead, there were drums and chanting, the smell of sage smoke, and words spoken in a language she didn't understand. When it was over, Dakea pronounced them joined, and Sarah found herself married to a man she'd known for mere weeks, in a ceremony her own people would never recognize. The wickiup assigned to them was small but well made, with thick buffalo hides to keep out the cold. That first night, Naichi made his position clear. "This marriage is for protection only," he said quietly, spreading his blankets on one side of the fire while gesturing for her and Emma to take the other. "I will not. You need not fear me." Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding, but also strangely hurt. "I know. This isn't what either of us wanted." "No." He was silent for a moment. "But perhaps it is what was meant to be. The spirits work in ways we cannot always understand." The first weeks were the hardest. Sarah struggled with the most basic tasks. Grinding corn on stone mettets left her hands bloody. Trying to cook over an open fire resulted in burned meals. And the complex social rules of Apache life seemed designed to trip her up at every turn. The women watched her failures with expressions ranging from amusement to disdain. Only Ayana showed patience, teaching her how to properly prepare acorn flour, how to bank a fire to last the night, how to read the subtle signals that governed camp life. "You are soft," she said one day, watching Sarah struggle with scraping a hide. "Life here will make you strong, or it will break you." Emma adapted more quickly, as children do. Within days, she was running with the Apache children, learning their games, picking up words in their language. Watching her daughter bloom despite the circumstances gave Sarah strength to endure. Naichi maintained careful distance, leaving early to hunt or scout, returning late. But he was unfailingly kind to Emma, teaching her to track rabbits in the snow, showing her which plants were safe to eat. Sometimes Sarah caught him watching them with an expression she couldn't read. The breaking point came during a blizzard that trapped them in the wickiup for 3 days. Emma developed a fever, burning hot despite the cold. Sarah's carefully maintained composure cracked as she held her delirious daughter, memories of Tom's death crushing her. "Please," she begged Naichi, "get the medicine, woman. There must be something." He was already moving, returning soon with an elderly woman who examined Emma with gentle hands. She prepared a tea from dried herbs, speaking soothingly in Apache while showing Sarah how to cool the child's fever with wet cloths. Through that long night, Naichi stayed. He kept the fire burning, helped hold Emma while Sarah forced medicine between her lips. And when Sarah finally broke down in exhausted tears, he didn't turn away. "She's all I have left," Sarah sobbed. "If I lose her too—" "You will not lose her." His voice was firm. "She is strong, like her mother." By morning, the fever broke. Emma opened clear eyes and asked for water in a hoarse whisper. Sarah wept again, this time with relief, and didn't protest when Naichi briefly touched her shoulder in comfort. After that night, something shifted between them. The careful distance remained, but underneath it grew a tentative partnership. Naichi began teaching her Apache words along with Emma. Sarah mended his clothes without being asked. They shared meals in companionable silence, no longer strangers forced together, but something approaching friends. Winter deepened, bringing hunger to the camp. Game was scarce, and the stored food dwindled faster than expected. Sarah watched children grow thin, saw the worry in the elders' eyes. When Naichi returned from a failed hunting expedition, frustration clear in every line of his body, she made a suggestion that surprised them both. The abandoned homesteads in the valley. There might be preserved goods left behind. Root cellars the owners didn't empty when they fled. Naichi studied her. "You would help us raid your own people's homes." "Empty homes. And they're not my people anymore. Are they?" The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "My people locked me in jail for showing mercy." He took a small group, including Sarah, to identify the most likely locations. They found enough preserved vegetables and smoked meat to help the camp through the worst of the season. As they loaded the goods, Sarah stood in the Morrison homestead kitchen, remembering the woman who'd lived there, who'd shared recipes and gossip before fear turned neighbors into enemies. "Regrets?" Naichi asked, finding her there. "No. Yes, it's complicated." She turned away from the empty kitchen. "Everything I believed about right and wrong seems unclear now." "This is wisdom," he said simply. "To see that truth has many faces." Spring's arrival brought new challenges. Soldiers increased their patrols, searching for the camp. Twice they had to move quickly, leaving behind anything they couldn't carry. Emma cried for the doll Ayana had made her, lost in the hasty evacuation. It was during the second relocation that disaster struck. A rattlesnake, hidden in the rocks where Emma was playing, struck without warning. Sarah's scream brought the entire camp running. Naichi killed the snake with his knife, but Emma's leg was already swelling, the twin puncture marks angry red. The medicine woman worked quickly, cutting the wound to draw out poison, applying poultices. But Emma's small body fought a losing battle. For 2 days she lingered between life and death, while Sarah refused to leave her side. "Please." She found herself praying to any god who would listen, the Christian god of her childhood. The Apache spirits Naichi honored. "Take me instead. Let her live." On the third dawn, Emma's breathing eased. The swelling began to go down. When she finally opened her eyes and smiled weakly at her mother, the entire camp seemed to breathe easier. Even the warriors who'd been most suspicious of Sarah's presence nodded approval at her devoted vigil. "The spirits heard you," Naichi said quietly, Mother's love speaks a language all gods understand. That night, for the first time since their marriage ceremony, Sarah reached across the fire to take his hand. "Thank you for everything. I know this isn't what you wanted, being bound to a white woman, but you are not just a white woman." His fingers tightened on hers. "You are Sarah who saves enemies, who sacrifices for her child, who stands between two worlds with courage. This is who I see." Under the vast desert stars, in a wickiup that had become home, Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her heart. This marriage might have begun as necessity, but perhaps it was becoming something more. In Nietzsche's dark eyes, she saw not just duty or protection, but the beginning of genuine affection. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the canyon, and the night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Sarah fell asleep still holding his hand, no longer mourning the life she'd lost, but beginning to embrace the unexpected life she'd found. Summer brought a fragile peace to the canyon, but it shattered on a morning when the scouts came racing back with dire news. A large group of white raiders was approaching from the south. Not soldiers, but worse. These were scalp hunters, men who killed Apache for bounty, taking no prisoners. Sarah recognized the lead scout's description of their leader, Jake Morrison, nephew of the Indian agent, a man known for his cruelty even among those who hated the Apache. He led a band of 20 ruthless men who sold Apache scalps to the Mexican government for gold. "We must move the camp," Dakea ordered. But even as preparations began, everyone knew the truth. The raiders were too close. The elderly and children would slow them down. They would be caught in the open. "There is another way," Nietzsche said quietly. "We fight, here, where we know the ground." The debate was fierce but brief. Fighting meant casualties, but running meant certain slaughter. The warriors began preparations, and Sarah found herself included in the planning, her knowledge of white tactics considered valuable. "They'll expect you to defend the camp directly," she told Nietzsche. "But Morrison is arrogant. He'll split his men to surround you, if you could draw them into the canyon narrows." As strategies took shape, Sarah made her own preparations. She knew how to shoot. Tom had insisted on it. When she asked Ayanna for a rifle, the woman studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You fight for your daughter? This, I understand." The attack came at dawn. Sarah watched from her assigned position, a cluster of rocks overlooking the canyon entrance, as riders appeared against the lightning sky. Her hands trembled as she recognized Morrison, his pale hair visible even at a distance. The first phase went as planned. A small group of warriors showed themselves, then retreated, drawing Morrison's men into pursuit. The raiders split up exactly as Sarah had predicted, some following the decoys, while others circled toward where they believed the camp to be. Then everything went wrong. Morrison had kept a reserve force hidden. As the Apache warriors sprang their ambush in the canyon, these fresh riders swept down toward the real camp from an unexpected direction. Only the warriors left to guard the women and children stood between them and massacre. Sarah saw it unfold from her vantage point, saw Morrison himself leading the charge toward the wickiups, where Emma sheltered with the other children. Without thinking, she abandoned her position and ran. The camp erupted in chaos. Women grabbed children and fled toward the preset hiding places. Warriors fought desperately against superior numbers. Sarah lost sight of Emma in the dust and gun smoke, panic clawing at her throat. She found Nietzsche first, locked in combat with two raiders. Blood streamed from a gash on his shoulder. As one raider raised his rifle for a killing shot, Sarah acted on instinct. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the man crumpled. Nietzsche finished the other and turned to her, his expression fierce with battle fury and something else, pride. "Emma!" she gasped. "Where?" A scream cut through the battle noise. Sarah spun to see Morrison dragging a small figure from behind an overturned wagon. Emma fought wildly in his grip, but she was no match for the grown man. "Well, well," Morrison called out, recognizing Sarah despite the Apache dress and dust. "The traitor widow, you've saved me the trouble of hunting you down." Sarah raised her rifle, but Morrison pulled Emma in front of him as a shield. "Drop it, or I'll snap her neck like a twig." Time seemed to freeze around them. The battle raged, but Sarah saw only her daughter's terrified face and Morrison's cold smile. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. "That's better." Morrison began backing toward his horse, still holding Emma. "You're both coming with me. There's quite a reward for the white woman who turned Apache. As for the brat, she'll fetch a good price in Mexico after some re-education." "No!" The voice that roared across the camp was Naichi's. He stood 20 feet away, arrow nocked and drawn. "Release the child." Morrison laughed. "You won't risk hitting her, savage." Naichi's eyes met Sarah's for an instant. "Trust me," they seemed to say. Then he shifted his aim slightly and released. The arrow whistled past Emma's ear and buried itself in Morrison's shoulder. He screamed and loosened his grip just enough. Emma bit down hard on his hand and wrenched free, running toward her mother. Morrison raised his pistol toward the fleeing child. Sarah didn't remember moving. Didn't remember raising Tom's rifle. She only knew that when the smoke cleared. Jake Morrison lay still in the dust, a growing red stain on his chest. The raiders, seeing their leader fall, lost heart. Those who could fled, pursued by Apache warriors. The attack was over, but the cost was visible everywhere. Wounded warriors, burned wiki-ups, and too many still forms. Sarah knelt in the dust. Emma clutched in her arms, shaking with reaction. She had killed a man. Not in the heat of distant battle, but face to face, watching the life leave his eyes. The fact that he would have murdered her child didn't make the weight of it any less. Naichi found them there. His shoulder wound still bled, but he knelt beside them, his hand gentle on Sarah's back. "You did what you had to do, what any mother would do." "I knew him," Sarah whispered. "Before all this, he used to buy supplies at the same store. His wife made quilts for church auctions. And today he came to murder children for gold." Ayana had appeared, her own clothing torn and blood-stained. "You chose the right side, sister." "Sister." The word penetrated Sarah's shock. She looked up to find other Apache women gathering around, women who had scorned her, tolerated her, gradually accepted her. Now they looked at her with something approaching respect. The aftermath was a blur of tending wounded, rebuilding damaged shelters, and mourning the dead. 3 warriors had fallen, including a young man barely older than a boy. Sarah helped prepare his body for burial, following Ayana's quiet instructions, feeling the weight of communal grief. That night, as the camp settled into exhausted silence, Naichi finally allowed Sarah to tend his wounded shoulder. She cleaned and bandaged it carefully, aware of the intimacy of the act. When she finished, he caught her hand. "You saved my life today, and Emma's. You fought as bravely as any warrior." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "Only fools feel no fear in battle. Courage is acting despite the fear." He was quiet for a moment. "The way you stood against Morrison, protecting Emma, I saw your true heart. It is the heart of a woman I would be proud to call wife, not just in name, but in truth." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Naichi, I know this began as necessity, but somewhere between winter and now, it became choice. My choice." He touched her face gently. "If you would have me, not as protector, but as husband, I would be honored." Looking into his eyes, Sarah saw the man who had taught her daughter to track rabbits, who had stayed through Emma's fever, who had trusted her with his people's safety. The cultural divide between them remained, would always remain to some degree, but what they had built together, trust, respect, affection, bridged that divide in ways she never could have imagined. "Yes," she whispered. "My choice too." When he kissed her, it tasted of new beginnings and hard-won peace. Outside the wiki-up, the desert night stretched vast and eternal. But inside, a family that had begun in desperation and necessity finally found its foundation in love. Later, as Emma slept peacefully between them, Sarah touched the beaded pouch at her throat, Naichi's first gift, given when they were still strangers. Now she understood its true meaning: protection, yes, but also connection. A reminder that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to exactly where one needed to be. The morning would bring new challenges. The raid would draw military attention. They would need to move again, find new hiding places, continue the endless dance of survival. But tonight, in this moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel what she had fought against for so long. She was home, not in a place, but with people who had become hers through trial and sacrifice and love. When Nietzsche's arms tightened around her in sleep, she smiled into the darkness. Sarah McKenna, widow and outcast, had found an ending she never could have written for herself. Or perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, it was not an ending at all, but a beginning. The journey back to the settlement's territory came sooner than expected. A message arrived through neutral traders. The army wanted to parley. They offered safe passage for negotiations, specifically requesting the presence of the white woman living among the Apache. "It's a trap," Ayanna insisted. "They want to capture you, use you as leverage." But Dakea studied the message with shrewd eyes. Perhaps the wind changes. This new commander, Colonel Brennan, he is not like the others. They say. Sarah's heart lurched at the name. Brennan? James Brennan? You know him? Nietzsche asked sharply. His wife Martha helped me when I was jailed. She brought me food, tried to comfort me about Emma. Sarah remembered the woman's kindness, so rare in those dark days. If James Brennan is anything like his wife, the council debated fiercely. Going meant risk, but the alternative was continued running, continued fighting, with winter approaching again and supplies low. Finally, Dakea decided a small group would go himself, Nietzsche, Sarah, and a handful of warriors. Emma would stay behind with Ayanna, insurance against betrayal. Leaving her daughter tore at Sarah's heart, but she understood the necessity. Emma had become as much Apache as white now, speaking the language fluently, playing with her adopted cousins. If something went wrong, she would be safe here. The meeting place was neutral ground, an abandoned way station in the valley. As they approached, Sarah saw the blue uniforms arranged in formal lines, so different from the Apache's flowing movement. At their head stood Colonel Brennan, a man she recognized from town gatherings before everything changed. His eyes widened when he saw her, Sarah in doe-skin dress, her skin tanned by desert sun, her hair in Apache braids. But his expression held no disgust, only a sort of sad recognition. "Mrs. McKenna," he said formally. "Or should I say Mrs. My name is Sarah." She lifted her chin. "I speak for my family." The negotiations were tense. Brennan laid out the government's position. The raids must stop. The Apache must accept reservation boundaries. In return, they offered protected land, supplies, and most surprisingly, amnesty for Sarah. "The circumstances of your situation have been reviewed," Brennan said carefully. "There are those who believe you were coerced, taken against your will. If you were to return, testify to that effect. All charges would be dropped. You could reclaim your property, your place in society." Sarah felt Nietzsche tense beside her, though his face remained impassive. This was what she had thought she wanted, a return to her old life. Emma safe in civilization. The nightmare ended. "And my husband?" she asked quietly. "My Apache family." Brennan's expression tightened. "The savage who abducted you would face justice, of course. The others would be relocated to the reservation." "I see." Sarah looked at the colonel directly. "Then you see nothing. I was not abducted. I was not coerced. I chose to stay with the people who saved me when my own kind would have let me rot in jail for showing mercy. Mrs. McKenna, surely you understand. I understand that you offer me a return to a world that cast me out for having a conscience. I understand that you would have me betray the man who risked his life for mine, who has been a better father to my daughter than she could have hoped for." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I was not taken against my will, Colonel. I fled with them willingly, and I stay with them by choice." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Brennan's face showed his struggled duty, warring with what seemed to be genuine sympathy. "Your daughter, then? Surely you want better for her than what? A life of love, family, and belonging? Sarah stepped forward. My daughter thrives among the Apache. She is loved, protected, educated in ways your schools would never teach. She knows which plants heal and which harm, how to read the sky for weather, how to move silent as a shadow. But more than that, she knows that judgment by skin color alone is the true savagery. Dakea spoke then, his English careful but clear. We do not seek war, but neither will we be penned like cattle. We ask only for the lands that have been ours since before your grandfathers were born. The canyon lands, the winter valleys, the sacred springs. Leave us these, and there will be peace. The negotiations went in circles for hours. Brennan had his orders, but Sarah could see him wrestling with what he witnessed. The dignity of Dakea, the protective stance of Naichi, and perhaps most of all, Sarah herself. Clearly there by choice. As the sun began to sink, Brennan made an unexpected proposal. There is another possibility. Unofficial, you understand, the army is stretched thin. We cannot patrol every canyon, every hidden valley if the Apache were to simply disappear into the deep territories, avoid the settlements and main trails. You suggest we become ghosts. Dakea said, I suggest nothing officially, but I am a practical man. I cannot fight what I cannot find. Brennan's gaze found Sarah again. And I would not separate a family that has found its own peace. It wasn't a solution. Not really. But it was a possibility. A chance to live free. If shadows, away from both reservation and settlement. The Apache would have to range farther, hide deeper, but they would remain free. As they prepared to leave, Brennan called Sarah aside. Your choice surprises me. Mrs. McKenna, you could have had your old life back. My old life died with my husband. Colonel, this life, strange as it seems to you, has given me something I never expected. A second chance at family, at belonging. She paused. How is Martha, your wife? Well, she'll be glad to know you're safe, if not what she'd call proper. He handed her a small bundle. She sent this, in case I saw you, said you'd understand. Inside was a Bible, worn and familiar. Sarah's own, left behind when she fled. Martha had saved it, kept it, sent it back. Inside the front cover was a new inscription in Martha's hand. Faith takes many forms. God bless your journey, wherever it leads. Sarah blinked back tears. Tell her thank you, for everything. The ride back to camp was subdued. They had gained nothing official, but perhaps something more valuable. Understanding, and the possibility of being left alone. That night, as the camp discussed relocating to the deeper canyons Brennan had so carefully not mentioned. Sarah sat with Naichi overlooking the valley. Emma played nearby with the other children, her laughter bright in the gathering dusk. You could have gone back, Naichi said quietly, taken the amnesty. No one would have blamed you. Would you have let me go? He was quiet for a long moment. If it was what you truly wanted, yes. Though it would have broken something in me, I'm not sure would heal. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. Then it's good I don't want to go. This is my home now. You are my home. Even if it means hiding forever, never being fully accepted by either world. I was never fully accepted even when I lived in their world, at least here. I'm rejected for choices I made freely, not for circumstances beyond my control. She found his hand, intertwined their fingers. And I'm not hiding. I'm living. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of moving an entire camp deeper into the wilderness. There would be hardships, dangers, the constant threat of discovery. But there would also be Emma's laughter, Ayana's grudging sisterhood, Dakea's wisdom, and Naichi's steadfast love. The colonel was wrong about one thing, Sarah said eventually. What's that? You didn't abduct me. She smiled into the darkness. If anything, I abducted you, dragged you into my cabin, forced you to stay, thoroughly disrupted your life. Naichi's rare laugh rumbled through his chest. Yes, you were very fierce. I was terrified. You should have been. I'm quite dangerous. The most dangerous thing that ever happened to me, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. And the best. As they made their way back to their wickiup, Sarah caught sight of a reflection in a still pool. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the frightened widow who had dragged a wounded warrior from a sandstorm. This woman was lean and strong, her face marked by sun and struggle, but also by something that had been missing before: purpose, peace. She was neither fully white nor fully Apache, but something new, something forged in the crucible of impossible choices and unexpected love. And despite all the uncertainties that lay ahead, Sarah knew she was exactly where she belonged. The move to the hidden canyon took 3 days of hard travel through terrain that would discourage all but the most determined pursuers. Sarah had grown strong in her time with the Apache, but the journey still tested her limits. They moved at night when possible, resting in the heat of day, always watching for dust clouds that might signal cavalry patrols. On the second night, they encountered something unexpected: a small wagon train, broken down and under attack by bandits. Not Apache, but white outlaws who preyed on travelers. The settlers had circled their wagons but were vastly outnumbered. "We should go around," one of the warriors suggested. "This is not our fight." But Sarah recognized one of the wagons, the distinctive blue paint, the carefully lettered sign. "That's the Miller's wagon. They have children." She remembered Mary Miller from town, one of the few who'd shown her kindness after Tom's death. The woman had 5 children, the youngest barely 2 years old. Naichi studied the scene below, where gunfire flashed in the darkness. "If we help them, they will know Apache are in the area. It risks everything. If we don't help them, those children die." Sarah met his eyes. "I can't just ride by, not again." Dakea made the decision. "We are not the monsters they paint us as. We help." The Apache attack on the bandits was swift and decisive. The outlaws, caught between the settlers' guns and Apache arrows, scattered into the night. In the aftermath, Sarah approached the wagons with her hands visible and empty. Mary Miller, it's Sarah McKenna." The woman peered out from behind a wagon wheel, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Sarah, but they said you were the Apache." "It's a long story. Are you hurt? The children." What followed was surreal. Sarah translating between the Apache warriors and the terrified settlers, explaining that they meant no harm, that they had only wanted to help. The settlers stared at her in her Apache dress, clearly struggling to reconcile the woman they'd known with what they saw now. Young Timothy Miller had been shot in the shoulder. Without hesitation, the Apache medicine woman went to work, using the same skills that had saved Naichi months ago. As she worked, Sarah saw understanding dawn in Mary's eyes. These were not the bloodthirsty savages of legend, but people with their own knowledge, their own compassion. "We won't speak of this," Mary whispered as they prepared to part ways. "Of seeing you, any of it. But Sarah, are you happy?" Sarah looked back at where Naichi waited with Emma, their daughter secure in his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible." They reached the new canyon as dawn broke on the 3rd day. It was perfect. Water, shelter, multiple escape routes if needed. As the band settled in, Sarah felt a sense of homecoming. This would be their place, far from the conflicts that had driven them here. Weeks passed in relative peace. Then came the morning when Naichi returned from a hunt with troubling news. A large group of men had made camp just outside the canyon, not soldiers, but a mixed band of settlers and hired guns. Among them, Naichi had recognized a face from Sarah's descriptions. "Patterson," Sarah breathed. "John Patterson. He was one of the most vocal about punishing me for harboring Naichi." "They're not here by accident," Naichi said grimly. "They're searching, and they're too close." That night, the War Council met. Some argued for immediate attack, others for fleeing deeper into the mountains. But Sarah had a different idea, born of desperation and perhaps foolishness. "Let me go to them, alone. Let them see me, chase me. I'll lead them away from the canyon. Away from all of you. No. Naichi's response was immediate and fierce. We do not sacrifice family. It's not sacrifice. It's strategy. Sarah outlined her plan. She would appear to be fleeing alone with Emma, a woman who had finally escaped her captors. The men would follow, eager for the reward and the glory. She would lead them in circles until the band had time to move again. And when they catch you, Ayana asked bluntly. They won't. I've learned from the best teachers. She managed to smile. Besides, I'll have help. A few warriors, staying hidden, making sure I don't actually get caught. The plan was dangerous, but it offered their best chance. At dawn, Sarah dressed in the tattered remains of her white woman's clothing, hidden away for so long. Emma protested fiercely at the deception until Sarah explained it was like the games Naichi had taught her, pretending to be prey to fool the hunters. Sarah appeared at the edge of Patterson's camp, Emma in her arms, looking every inch the desperate escapee. The shout went up immediately. Men scrambled for horses and guns. Sarah ran, but not too fast, letting them see her struggle, her apparent fear. The chase lasted all day. Sarah used every trick Naichi had taught her, doubling back, using water to hide tracks, creating false trails, always staying just ahead, just in sight, drawing them farther from the canyon with each mile. As the sun began to set, she reached the predetermined place, a box canyon with only one way in or out. The pursuers thought they had her trapped. Patterson rode at their head, his face triumphant. "Give it up, Mrs. McKenna," he called. "You've led us a merry chase, but it's over. Come back peaceful-like, and we'll see you get fair treatment." "Fair treatment?" Sarah laughed bitterly. Playing her role. "Like the fair treatment I got before, locked up for saving a life? You harbored a savage, but you've clearly suffered enough for that mistake. Come back with us. Let that child grow up among her own kind." It was then that Patterson's triumph turned to horror. From the rocks above, Apache warriors materialized like ghosts, not attacking, just standing there, arrows nocked, a silent promise of death if the settlers moved wrong. Naichi appeared beside Sarah, and she saw Patterson's face pale as he recognized the Apache from the wanted posters. "The woman is not your concern," Naichi said clearly. "She is my wife, the child, my daughter. We are family." "You're holding them against their will," Patterson began. "Am I?" Sarah stepped forward. "Look at me, John Patterson. Really look. Do I look like a prisoner? Do I look abused, mistreated, desperate to escape?" And indeed, despite the deliberate tatters of her costume, Sarah stood tall and strong, her face calm, Emma clinging to her trustingly. "This is what you cannot understand," she continued. "I chose this. I chose them. Not because I was forced, but because they showed me more humanity than my own people did when I needed it most." "You're not thinking clearly," Patterson insisted. "No white woman would choose to live as a savage. Then perhaps it's time to reconsider what savagery really means." Sarah's voice rang off the canyon walls. "Is it savage to save an enemy's life? To take in a widow and child with no expectation of reward? To teach that child that worth isn't measured by skin color but by character?" She paused, looking at each man in turn. "Or is it more savage to lock up a woman for showing mercy? To hunt people for bounty? To teach children that different means dangerous?" Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. They'd come expecting to rescue a captive. Instead, they faced a woman clearly there by choice, protected by warriors who could have killed them all but hadn't. "You go back." Dakea spoke, his authority clear despite his age. "Tell others, we want no war. We want only to live free. The woman stays because she wishes. The child thrives. This is truth." Patterson looked like he wanted to argue more, but the tactical situation was clear. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and, perhaps more importantly, the moral certainty they'd ridden out with was crumbling. "This ain't over," he said finally. The law already tried to destroy my family once." Sarah interrupted. "We're beyond its reach now. Go home, John. Tell whatever story salves your conscience. But know this, I am where I choose to be, with the family I chose, and we will defend that choice. The retreat was sullen but quick. As the dust of their departure settled, Emma looked up at her mother with shining eyes. We fooled them good, didn't we, Mama? We did, little one. But more than that, I think we made some of them think. That night, back in their true camp, moved to an even more remote location while Sarah led the chase. The band celebrated. Not victory in battle, but something perhaps more precious. The hope that they might truly be left alone. As Sarah sat by the fire, Emma asleep against her shoulder and Naichi's arm around them both, Ayana approached. The woman who had once looked at her with such suspicion now carried 2 cups of pine needle tea. You risked much today, Ayana said, settling beside them. We all risk much, every day, just by being who we are. True, but today you could have gone with them, started over again in their world. Sarah shook her head. That world has nothing for me now. This one has everything. Ayana smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Then you are truly my sister. As the fire burned low and the camp settled into sleep, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here, from a desperate widow saving an enemy's life to a woman standing between 2 worlds, choosing love over law, family over familiarity. The old Sarah McKenna was gone, buried with her husband in that other life. The woman who remained was something new, neither fully white nor Apache, but wholly herself. Wife to Naichi, mother to Emma, sister to Ayana, daughter to Dakea, member of a family that blood hadn't made but choice had forged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The search for them might intensify, or it might fade as newer conflicts drew attention elsewhere. They would continue to live in the margins, in the wild places civilization hadn't yet claimed, but they would live free, and they would live together, in her husband's arms, with her daughter safe beside them and her adopted family sleeping peacefully around them. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. She had saved a life in a sandstorm, and in return, that life had saved her. Not a bad trade, all things considered. The desert wind sang through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and home. And Sarah slept, no longer the settler widow who'd saved an Apache raider, but simply a woman who had found her place in the world, unexpected, unconventional, and absolutely right. Thank you all for listening to this story of love and survival in the Wild West. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed Sarah and Naichi's journey, please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share what touched you most about their story. Until next time, partners.